part of the Navy or part of the Army, whatever. I had decided based on those presentations that I want to be a Marine. Now, here we are talking about 1943. So, I could have gone to all those garden spots, you know, like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima and so forth. But I had decided that I'll wait until the semester ends, and then I will sign up with the Marine Corps. Well, one Saturday morning, my next door neighbor, also a fellow student of mine at Loyola University, asked me if I would take him to March Field to Riverside, California, because he wanted to be an aviation cadet. So his father gave us some gas ration stamps. Remember those? The C stamps sticking in your window there? They were good for 4 gallons. Yeah. So his father gave us enough stamps to get us to March Field. Well, on the way down there, he said, what are you going to be doing all day? And I said, well, I'll find something to read. Don't worry about me. He said, well, why don't you apply? Well, I'm going to be a Marine. Well, but you're going to be there all day. Why don't you just, well, who knows what might happen? So finally, just to hush him up, I said, okay, I'll take the test. So we spent the whole day at March Field being interviewed, doing written tests, eye test up to here. At the end of the day, a colonel with a clipboard standing up in front of the room, 200 or 300 people in there, and they called my name. They did not call Jeffrey's name. Yeah, well, he had an eye problem. He went on to Coast Guard, and he had quite a career in World War II. But anyway, on the way home, I'm driving the car and patting him on the shoulder, and he's crying. Literally crying. This is the guy that had built every model airplane there was, had them hanging from the ceiling in his bedroom. But he didn't make it. So 10 days later, I got a letter, 2 letters, as a matter of fact, in the same mail. One said, congratulations, you've been drafted. And the other one said, report to camp something or other in Utah, basic training for the Army Air Corps. So I went down to the draft board and said, ha ha ha, you didn't get me, I'm going to be in the air, and so not, forget it, draft board. And they said, well, we'll see. I don't know if we can stop it, we've already sent it in. So I ended up with a draftee serial number in the aviation cadet program. Now, I was the only one with that. I caught holy hell from every corporal, everybody, because of my draftee serial number. We went to a place in California, Santa Ana, which was a classification center. And they decided which school they were going to send us to. Navigator school, bombardier school, and the leftovers were pilot school. Well, that's what the Navy, that's what the other guys said. But no, they picked the bright ones, of course, to be navigators, and the ones with manual dexterity and so forth to operate the Norden bomb site. And again, the leftovers went to pilot school. I went to a pilot school in California, and I was the first one to solo. There were 80 people in our barracks, and everybody put $5 in the pool, and I won it. Taxied out to the end of the line there, and avoided things like checking the mags and so forth. And any of you pilots know what I'm talking about. And here comes another airplane, taxied up beside me. The instructor over there climbed out of the back seat, and he was standing on the wing talking to his guy. So I'm praying that, hey, come on, instructor, get off my wing. I want to be first. You know, that $400, and my God, that's 7 months' pay in those days, and that includes flying pay. Yeah, true. So anyway, I 5 times 80. I got in my notes here. It says equals 7 months of actual money pay. I sent it to my mother, of course. I was 18 years old. Well, after going through primary flying school and basic flying school, advanced flying school, I ended up with some VIP pinning some silver wings on me and control bars on my shoulders. So that took a year to do that, and it took me 1 sentence to tell about it. Okay. I was assigned to a crew, a B-17 crew. We were sent to Rapid City our assembly point was Mount Rushmore. We'd go up there and fly around Mount Rushmore, running around the circle till all the airplanes got there. Then we'd go off and bomb Lincoln, Nebraska. Well, literally, what we did, we would open our bomb bay doors and trigger our bombs, which we didn't have, but we took pictures of the thing. That was it. That was our training. Then we were assigned, as I said, to a crew. And what a bunch of misfits, you wouldn't believe it. They could have made a movie about these guys. For example, the one that was assigned to us as a tail gunner in a B-17, he was let out of prison to join the Air Corps. Now, they did that in World War II. I'm sure you knew about that. I don't think they turned loose you guys that killed a few people. But anyway, that was part of our training. So now we're ready to go overseas. We're crew trained, and we know all about B-17. One of our people said, you know, they don't have good whiskey in England. Yeah, you can't get, they have gin served at room temperature, but that's it, you know. So let's take some with us. So we take up a collection among our 9 members of our crew, and I got delegated to go in and buy a case of liquor. Canadian Club, good stuff. Brought it back to the barracks. Somebody else said, well, our airplane's got to be inspected several times, and they'll confiscate, you know those airplanes, they'll confiscate our Canadian Club. So we got to hide it. So we hid our Canadian Club throughout the airplane. I personally took off an inspection plate off of the underside of the wings behind the number 3 engine, wrapped up my bottle of Canadian Club with an old dirty T-shirt and stuffed it in the wing next to the fuel tanks. Hey, by the way, this is all true. Okay. So we all did as well as we could our 12 bottles of Canadian Club. And we headed and so we were called into a secret briefing and told all about our trip through Greenland and Iceland and so forth and so forth. I'm sorry, I got to refer to my notes here. We got to Greenland. Oh, well, first of all, before we left Lincoln, Nebraska, I decided to go into town and get a haircut. So I'm sitting there in the barber chair, but just to tell you how really tight security was in those days, the barber says, I hear you guys are leaving tonight. It actually happened. I didn't respond to him. So we get to Greenland and we can't land because it's socked in. Now those fjords with the vertical walls, they're tough enough to land in anyway, and And maybe some of you have been at BWII in Greenland, and you know what I'm talking about. So we were sent on to Iceland. Well, we didn't have enough fuel to go to Iceland. That water temperature down below was 17 degrees, we were told. Ooh. How long do you last in a 17-degree ice bath? Oh, and it was partly our fault too. Approaching Greenland, we got in a big argument back and forth about what was that we were looking at down there. Was it an aircraft carrier or was it an iceberg? Well, I was on the side of the iceberg, and we got in a big argument back and forth, everybody on their intercom. So we whipped the airplane over in a turn and headed down, flew across. There was an iceberg. I was right. I won the argument. But we used up a lot of fuel getting back up to 12,000 feet. So our hero, our navigator, Brzezinski was his name. By the way, he was the only Yankee on the team, on the crew. Our name of our airplane was the Rambling Rebel, and Brzezinski was from Minneapolis. He's a damn Yankee. The only one on the crew. But Brzezinski saved our lives, literally saved our lives. You can't live in 17-degree water very long. B-17s don't float. So we had to make it to Iceland or die. There was no choice. And I don't know if you've ever had a situation in your life where you're going to die any minute, because that's where we were. We knew it. And we were talking back and forth to members of the crew. Had somebody lead us in prayers and so forth. And we made it. We landed in Iceland. The wind was blowing like crazy. They pulled out a couple of trucks to park them around our airplane so it wouldn't turn it over. They had a brand new B-17 full of Canadian club. But I'm making a hero out of Brzezinski. I just want to say he was a smart guy. He was a brilliant guy. His socks didn't match. He didn't care. Somebody pointed that out to him. His socks don't match. He'd look at them, and then he'd say, "I got another pair at home just like them." Okay, so we were there 10 days, and it's like 4 degrees below. We are out of Reykjavik, the capital. One of the crew members said, "Let's walk into town, see the city." I mean, we're so close, it's the capital. And I said, 4 degrees, are you kidding? No, come on. And so they talked me into it. I put on everything I owned, and we walked out, and the wind hit us, of course, and we got very close to town when this Jeep drove up by us, and this MP lifted the curtain there and says, "Are you guys from a combat crew?" "Yes." "Well, you know you're not allowed off the base. Get in." He saved our lives because my face was so frozen I couldn't talk. My lips would not breathe. It was really cold. But again, to get back to Brzezinski, on our first mission, now we landed in England at a base called Chorley, C-H-O-R-L-E-Y, Chorley. It is right now today a women's prison. I know because I visited it a few years ago. But anyway, back to Brzezinski. On our first mission, we're flying over this big city, and somebody got on the interphone back there and said, "Blow, what is that town down there, that big city?" And he said, "I'll call you back." He always said, "I'll call you back." Now, he's the navigator. He ought to know where the heck we are. "I'll call you back." So, with a moment of silence, and another voice says, "What country is that?" "I'll call you back." So, actually happened. I only tell truth. I'm a Knight of Columbus after all. I'm going to conclude with just two quick stories. Again, actual experiences. On about our 20th mission, our airplane, the number 3 engine, burst into flame. And I mean burst, it didn't smolder, flicker, or anything. It burst into flames. And it's burning back over the engine and into the wing. Now, the wing is made out of aluminum that thick. If you can't see it, it's about a 16th of an inch. But anyway, it's melting, and what's under there? Fuel tanks with 130 octane, none of this 85 stuff you put in your car. And okay, so we had to bail out. I did everything wrong. Now, as a cadet, I led the class. I had a straight A. But now in real life, bailing out, I did everything wrong. For example, we were above 20,000 feet. We were still over England. We were supposed to, when we bailed out, hold on to our ankles and roll out through this little trap door, which was 2 feet by 2 feet. And the idea was to cut down on the flow of air coming over 160 knots. And so don't pop your chute for a while. Wait till you get down there where there's some oxygen in the air, you know? Well, I did that. I started breathing. I just barely cleared the tall ball turret machine guns. How would you like to be hit with a solid steel baseball bat at 160 miles? But for some miraculous reason, thank you, St. Anthony, I did not hit those machine guns. He had already gone, and they were sticking straight down, and I went, you know, they were probably 20 inches, 22 inches apart, and why I didn't hit them, I don't know. But I immediately popped my parachute. So now I'm floating down, trying to light a cigarette. And oh heck. And the wind is coming up like 600 feet a minute, you know, past the parachute. Oh, and I'm going to get back to the Canadian Club in a minute. I should pay attention to my notes. I worked hard on these notes, so I should use them. Anyway, so I'm floating down in the parachute and trying to light a cigarette, and that didn't work because the matches kept blowing out. So I threw them away, threw away the cigarettes. And I'm looking down, oh my God, that's the English Channel down there. 17 degrees, it's cold in that water down there, and again, B-17s don't float. And I get down, I'm falling in the parachute. I hit what I had thought was the English Channel, but it wasn't really, it was a cloud layer. So I just went on through it and kept going. I landed in a lady's front yard, in her flower bed. Oh, guys. So here I am lying flat on my back. Here's the woman standing there. I'm looking up at a bunch of flowers and this white silk parachute. I thought I was in heaven. I really did. Well, my God, it was so beautiful. You know, and here I'm lying flat on my back. I shouldn't have done that either, because they trained us how to manipulate parachutes, you know. I did well as a cadet, again. I spent 7 or 8 hours at her house. Her name was Mrs. Childs. She was an older woman. She was probably 30 years old, something like that. Well, hey, we were all 19 years old, the B-17 crew. Okay, so she, all day long, is feeding me British tea, being very nice to me. Finally, the MPs showed up to pick me up, and so I'm climbing in the Jeep, and this MP said, "Lieutenant, where is your parachute?" Well, I gave it to her. Well, you can't do that. That's government property. You went into her house and found that parachute, threw it in the back of the Jeep, and we drove off. The next day, I borrowed a Jeep. I went down to the parachute shack and had them climbing around in among this mound of parachutes, nylon mostly, but a few silk ones still left. They were in transition over to nylon. But they climbed around on this mound of parachutes and found a couple of silk ones for me. Imagine 32-foot diameter on those silk parachutes. How many tablecloths, curtains, skirts and blouses they could make. Remember, in those days, everything in England was rationed, because the island of England was surrounded by German submarines, and everything was rationed. Okay, so for us to bring a couple of armloads of things we could buy at the PX, makeup, cookies, whatever they had, and we went walking into her house, became a place for us and our crew to hang out. No other crew, just the 9 of us hanging out in her place. We'd always take her something, some food or whatever. So for years, after I came back to the States, we're still corresponding, and Christmas cards and so forth and so forth. Then one year I didn't get a Christmas card from Mrs. Childs. And I'll never know whatever happened to the nice lady. She was a very nice lady. One other story I want to tell you, and then I'll get off here. I was dating the most beautiful girl in the English countryside. She was beautiful. Maybe some of you might remember a movie star called Jean Tierney. Remember her, Jean Tierney? Well, this girl could have been a stand-in for her. She was that kind of a beauty. She was really a doll. And I said, Doris, you would look so good in a black dress. A couple of weeks later, I'm back in Tottenham, part of London, and to call on Doris again. And her mother grabbed me by the shoulder pad, hauled me into a back bedroom, closed the door, and screamed at me, "Lieutenant," which is what they call lieutenants. "Lieutenant, Doris went out and spent a whole year's worth of ration coupons on that black dress. She can't wear it to work. It's so impractical." Oh, Mom was frantic. Okay, a couple more weeks go by. I pick up Doris in her black dress. What a doll she was, boy. She was so pretty. She really was. Anyway, we went down to Leicester Square to the movies. It was about the British Navy, and it was loaded with propaganda. Of course, our movies were loaded with propaganda also in those days. But as we're coming out of the theater, she takes up where the movie had left off. She's bragging up at him, the British Navy, and oh heck, I finally stopped her. Doris, stop a minute. Here we are out in front of the theater on the sidewalk there. And I said, you wouldn't have a Navy if we didn't give it to you. That's a direct quote. That's also the end of Doris. Oh, she looked at me with that British look for about 20 full seconds, and then she did a 180 and disappeared in the crowd. I never saw her again. End of story. Back to the Canadian Club real quickly, and I'll get out of here. So we landed in Charlie when we first arrived in England, and we go over to retrieve our 12 bottles of Canadian clubs. It turns out that we were able to rescue 1 bottle out of 12. The reason being, well, on the bottle that I had hidden away behind the engine, that was the problem. Behind the hot engine, and then landing in Iceland and sitting there for 10 days, and oh my God, you know, way below zero, the wind blowing and so forth. But everybody had the same problem with, there was 1 bottle of Canadian Club. So here we are in this big room, with our suitcases, B4 bags to Air Force people, piled up in the middle of the floor, and this 1 bottle of Canadian Club. We moved the bunks so they were against the wall, made a complete circle around the room. So we're handing that bottle to the next person, the next person, the next person. I started it by giving it to the guy next to me, and he went that way with it. It never got to me. Well, no, there was not even 1 sip left when it got to me. But that's all right, I don't care for bourbon anyway. If it had been Scotch, I would have put up some fight.